I'd like now to introduce and invite Peter Brabeck to join me here on the stage. Peter is today chairman of Nestle. For many years he was chairman and CEO. He's worked in Nestle his entire career. He had many assignments in the developing world, in Latin America and other parts of the world. I think his roots in running Nestle businesses in the developing world, I think, were one of the critical precursors of his kind of deep awareness and understanding of this idea. He has become, perhaps the single most influential corporate leader in many of the important societal issues, certainly like water and others, where he brings this perspective of shared value to the table. So we're going to ask Peter to make a few opening remarks, and then I'll get a chance to ask him some questions. I don't get to do this very often. And then you'll get to ask him some questions. So Peter, welcome, and we're just thrilled you're here.
Well, thank you very much, Michael, for your very generous words. First of all, thanks, Mark and Michael, for having invited me to this, for me, very exciting, emotional moment, frankly speaking. I have prepared a small speech, but I will not do it. You find it afterwards. I give it the written form, so you can get it afterwards. I think it might be worthwhile having the perspective of a pragmatic businessman on how he sees this creating shared value, but I don't think it's worthwhile the time now to go with that. Rather make somewhat, perhaps 3 comments, my reaction to your speech. The first reaction is, I'm extremely happy how Mark and you have taken a baby, as an infant formula producer, of course, I talk about babies. A baby which I have handed over to you in order you to adopt it. And what I have seen today is a strong, driving, active, dynamic young man, which you have made out of this small, innocent baby. And I think with a great, great future. And it has developed itself in a magnificent manner, like a company alone could never have done that. And that was exactly the reason why we decided to give this brainchild into adoption, because we knew that if it stayed where it started as a thought from a company, it could never be accepted nor have the direction that it has when it's being adopted by 2 intellectual leaders of the world. So I'm extremely happy with this decision to have given you the care of this baby and to see what you have been able to do with that. The whole idea came, just to be very short, I mean, it was a typical reaction when you spend 5 days talking about corporate social responsibility in Davos, and everybody saying, every single one of the participants, the slogan of that Davos meeting, because normally Davos always has a slogan. That year the slogan was, we have to give back to society. That was the slogan. Everybody of this almost 3,000 people, every single speech, every single meeting, there was the same, we have to give back to society. And there were Angelina Jolie, and there were Sharon Stone, and there were everybody around here, and we have to pick at mosquitoes nets, we have to give it to society and all this stuff. And then at the end of that, I stood up and said, I'm very sorry. I have nothing to give back to society because I have not been stealing anything from society. And I have been creating value for society by doing business. And then there was a deep, of course, silence. But that's the baby, if you want. And then I had this incredible opportunity to meet Michael and Mark, and talk about this idea, that this idea about giving back to society doesn't make any sense. It will always be limited in its expression. And only if you integrate the societal targeting into your business strategy can you become what you so rightly have pointed out. It becomes a social responsibility which is sustainable, because the better you are, the more you can do. The more you can solve problems. It is scalable, exactly what you were saying. Against philanthropy, which I also say fully, I have an issue about the corporate philanthropy. We can talk about that. I think philanthropy should be done with my own money, not with the money of my shareholders, but that's a different story. Might talk about it. But philanthropy per se is not. And we have seen that very clearly. If you look at the philanthropic giving in 2007, 2008, it dropped by more than $14 billion US from one year to the other, which shows you that it is not sustainable. It depends on what is the situation and things like this. Whereas creating shared value has this incredible aspect of sustainability in its initial thinking. It's part of the DNA of creating shared value. And that's what makes it so absolutely special the way it is. Now, perhaps one more thought, and then you should. One thing which I would perhaps give you as an additional consideration, my feeling is that we deviated from what you rightly said, an instinctive engagement for creating shared value, which we had when private enterprises really started. So the question is, why then have we deviated so much, especially in the 80s and the 90s, from this instinctive creating shared value, and we moved to what was called the maximization of shareholder value? And if you analyze it well, you will come to the conclusion it is short-termism. It's all about pushing business more and more and more and more to short-term maximization, which of course finds its expression in quarterly profit results. And I talked the other day also to the investor community. I said, it is absolutely fascinating to think that when you fix a share price, analyst, target, you give us 15 times earnings, 19 times earnings. I said, I'm not sure you know what you're really doing. Because what you are doing is you are telling that we will deliver 19 consecutive years the same result we have been delivering last year. And you are not asking me one single question in any of the roadshows how I will be able to do that. How sustainable is what I'm doing? How I'm going to change my organization so that in 19 years by now, I will be able to deliver the same profit than Nestlé? But what you're doing, you're looking at the last quarterly result, and if the last quarterly result is 0.5% below your expectations, my share price falls 5%. I mean, absolutely inconceivable. You value in 19 years forward, and you react on a quarterly result. Okay? So that's the reason why we don't give quarterly results. I don't want this organization to be driven by quarterly results. And those are the barriers which I wanted to mention that most of you here in the room and your companies are going to find. It is this extreme drive to short-termism that we have. It is this reflected, as I said, in the quarterly reporting, but it's reflected in compensation systems. Compensation systems which, again, are putting main emphasis on short-term results, are driving the CEOs and management to take short-term decisions, which are intrinsically against creating shared value. It is the drive of changing the CEOs. I mean, the average time of a CEO today is 3 years in the United States. What do you want the CEO to do in 3 years? He grabs what he can. He has no responsibility which goes over these 3 years things. So the biggest barrier you are going to find in the implementation afterwards is this short-term thinking that is almost framed into our business thinking of today. And I think when you're talking then afterwards to the creating shared value investors, this will be one of the things that you really will have to convince them that they start to look. There are some of those people who are making their investment decision on the long-term capabilities of the company, but still the big majority is being driven by much too short-term things. So those, I would say, is for me perhaps the biggest obstacle in the daily implementation and to convince management on the top level to embrace creating shared value. It is this dichotomy between the short-term drive of the markets, which then leads to the short-term thinking of management, and which is in juxtaposition against the long-term thinking you have to have if you want to really embrace creating shared value. So perhaps 2 or 3 remarks just to warm up.
Thank you, Peter. And, as always, fantastic. You know, just to reflect on the investor comment you made just for a minute, I mean, I have this somewhat view that I haven't really shared very widely on investors. And how do investors create shared value is a question that I like to think about. And the way investors create shared value is to actually get capital to those organizations that can use that capital the most effectively to create both economic and social returns. And I think investors have lost a sense of shared value. They're looking too narrowly at what they do, and they've missed the fundamental purpose of investing. And I think most of Wall Street has missed it as well. And so this is a campaign, I need armor and a ray gun, to take this one on. But I hope you'll take it on with me, because I know you believe the same thing. So let's talk about Nestle's shared value journey a little bit. So talk about how you decided to actually formalize shared value as really central to the mission of Nestle. How did that happen? How did you bring your colleagues along?
Well, I told you how it started to happen. I mean, I had the privilege to meet the 2 gentlemen, and then afterwards, what we did, we asked them to analyze what was the social impact of Nestle in one continent. You remember we asked you to go to Latin America, because we felt that that was a continent where since 1920 we have been living this fundamental idea that we integrate social achievements in our business strategies. I mean, before Nestle came to Latin America, there was basically no notion about a milk district or something like this. This was a notion that has been developed at the late 19th century in Switzerland and in the Alps, but this didn't exist in Latin America. Some farmers had a cow, like 20 years ago, some farmers had a cow in the north of China. And we brought this idea about milk districts and people being able to make a living out of being a milk farmer. That was all new. So we created this, and this needs, of course, infrastructure. I mean, I remember Venezuela. The first milk factory was in a place there was no road. The farmers brought their milk on the canoe on the river, because there was absolutely no road. We had to build a small railway line to get there. Well, wherever you build the railway line, Schumpeter said that the moment you build the railway line, the economics of the region is changing completely. Completely. What was right before, like today, if you're putting in a Broadway internet connection, it changes everything. The same things. So we had this, and that's why we asked you then afterwards, why don't you go independently from us and see whether there is something true about this nebulous thinking that we had in our head. And I think the outcome was very clear. That and we published it together, so it was available to everybody. That yes, there is this possibility of a very consciously creating social value, not in contrast to the economic value, but almost as an indispensable base in order to create long-term, and I make again the emphasis on the long-term, sustainable shareholder value. You see, now once we had this, thanks to your work, once we had these results, once we could see, and you helped us, of course, to intellectually also to split this up in what we see today, product, and I think at that time we called it was product, it was value chain, and I think it was cluster or something like that. I think that those were the three things that we came out of the studies. Well, once we saw that, I talked then to the board of directors. I didn't start below. I started on the board of directors. And I exposed, at that time it was not me, it was the responsible who is sitting here, Niels Christensen is still here. He exposed this to the board of directors as a new idea, to see whether the board would embrace that the board would understand that. And only once we had the board, then we started to move down into the management. And then moving it down into the whole organization, which is, of course, like always, an issue how to align an organization, big organization, to a new idea, which is something which takes, first of all, a lot of conviction. Secondly, I think a lot of communication, and thirdly, you have to live it. So I think it's almost indispensable that if you really want to embrace it, you have to start on top. It is difficult to start below, because if the top doesn't follow, if the top doesn't understand, and believe me, as I think you pointed it out, it is not so easy to understand creating shared value. And there's a lot of confusion about. And even if I looked at all the reactions to your articles, I mean, from the new capitalism to a thing like this, well, for a business board, that becomes very, very, very difficult to understand and to embrace, because suddenly we are in the middle of an ideological warfare, which is not necessarily the easiest thing to bring into the level of a board. So I have tried to bring it always back to the way how an ice cream salesman can do that. I mean, just saying, it is above all this commitment to the long-term, sustainable value creation for my shareholders, and by integrating the societal targets into the main business strategy. That's it. And I think what you have also pointed out just now, the more we will be able to find ways of measurement, the easier it's going to be to convince the managements and the boards to embrace it. Because the first thing, of course, is, again, at least in my company, the first idea was that's another of these marketing gags of Brabeck. I mean, as I'm more or less known to be a marketing guy, so they said this is another of these tricks. And even the investor society was like this. So the more you find ways how we measure this thing, the better and easier it's going to be then afterward the implementation.
So Nestle, as it embraced this idea and put it in the center of the kind of company's mission, you had to make some choices about what were the areas where Nestle could have the biggest impact. In your business, in your company, talk about that process. How did you get there?
Well, I thought again, I learned another one today from you. I thought this differentiation between saying, philanthropy and corporate social responsibility are generics, whereas creating shared value is specific. I like that. You cannot have a generic creating shared value. You cannot embrace creating shared value within a company if you do not understand and if you do not analyze where is it that your company can really optimize, not maximize, optimize creating shared value. Now, in our case, and again with the help of you, we identified 3 areas which were basically nutrition, which is not surprising, being food intake, nutrition, the door opener to wellness. The second one was water, reason being that water is the single most important natural resource for the long-term development of our company. And the third one was rural development. Why? Because, as I mentioned before, historically we have been very much involved with small-scale farmers from the milk industry. And after having embraced creating shared value, we have now extended this into the work with the small-scale farmers in the coffee and in the cocoa area. So those were the 3 areas where, after an in-depth analysis at Nestle, we see where we can optimize this thing. This does not mean that we are not creating shared value in many other things, but just to have some priority, as you were also saying somewhere in your speech, that you were saying you have to be targeted, you have to be focused. Well, that's the 3 target area priority area that we have identified.
So you have these overarching areas with the understanding that there's more to be done. You know, every plant has opportunities for shared value, really, at the manufacturing level and so forth. How do you then go about getting all the business units understanding the issue and then pursuing it in their particular business?
Well, as I said, like with every strategy, when you are a company of 340,000 people, any new idea, any new strategy has to be absorbed by such an organization. The organization has to be aligned, because the creating shared value activity is always decentralized. You're not creating shared value sitting on the top of the company. I mean, the ones who are creating the shared value reality is a factory manager somewhere in West Africa, like Justin was saying before, you know. And we have about almost 1,000 now technical assistants for farmers who are out there on the daily and help the 700,000 farmers that we have in order to be more efficient, to have better quality, therefore get more for their effort, or they help them to create the schools, rural schools for the children and things like this. I mean, those are the people who are creating the value. I mean, it's not the guy sitting in the head office who are creating the value. So you have to penetrate, you have to get message over there. And one of those things is, of course, that you constantly show that. I mean, the publication of a creating shared value report, for example, gave a clear sign to the whole organization with the introductory letter signed by the chairman and the CEO, gave a clear sign to the organization there's something we have at least to take a little bit serious. Okay? Well, in today, 4 or 5 years later, you can go to any of our operating companies, and any single one of them has its own creating shared value report, creating shared value report in China, in Chile, in Sweden, wherever. Everybody has it now. It's part of our DNA. It's part now of our thinking. Another one, for example, which came later afterwards. Whenever we make a financial investment, whenever we make a capital investment, and before we had the normal document, the financial note or whatever to justify this investment. Well, now we demand that in each one of those propositions, investment propositions, which are coming to the executive board or to the board of directors, we have a final evaluation of the impact of the creating shared value impact. How many jobs are being created? What is the investment into infrastructure? What is the thing like this? So we are starting now to demand that when we make an investment, not only to see what is the financial return, but also what is the impact on the social side, the societal targets. And I think how many indirect jobs, I mean, how many mechanic shops you are going to use in the future and things like this. Are they there? Do we have to prepare? So it has become now part, clearly an expression of what we said, of our financial notes. It's in the financial notes. We have now a chapter, Creating Shared Value. What is it?
Great. One more question, then we'll open it up to the audience. So you have a highly visible, very articulate shared value philosophy. You've driven that throughout the business. Units have reports. Everybody is on the same page. So when you go to Wall Street or London and talk to your investors, what do they think about all this?
Well, as a matter of fact, I'm going, after this meeting at 5 o'clock, I'm going to meet my investors here in Boston, and I will talk about creating shared value. I talk about them, because they ask me, what is all this stuff about? You are spending our money on something which so I'm trying to explain them a little bit like I do here. I think there is, and again, I was impressed by the way you have put this investor one from the maximization shareholder value, socially responsible investing, impact investing, and shared value investing. The impact investing, I think, has become, if I would have to put the percentage, I would say about 30% of investors today would fall in the category of impact investing. Especially, I would say, or perhaps a little bit more in Europe than here. But you have value investors for whom the whole aspect of how you assume your social responsibility is becoming at least as important than it is your financial returns. So there is a group out there, and I think you will find, I'm quite convinced, you're going to find a part of the investors who are willing to become shared value investors. I'm quite convinced there are. Not everybody, of course. I mean, you have still enormous amount of short-term investors who are more on the speculative area. I mean, if you think about how much of the shares today is being traded by computer programs, I mean, they don't know anything about those computer models, have no idea about creating shared value. You do it an algorithm. Okay, there's no ethic, no morale to them. So, and this is still a big part of it. So that's why I said this short-termism, which is reflected for me in the pinnacle and in this computer trading, of course, they are still far away. But there is a growing amount of investors who are really willing to listen and to take this into consideration in their investment.
Thank you.